Buenos Aires, Argentina, the 1970s. It was a time of political turmoil, a time of fear. But in the quiet, wealthy suburb of San Isidro, another kind of terror was growing. This wasn't about politics. This was about something primal, something dark. A killer was loose. He hunted in the night. He chose his victims carefully. He was a shadow moving through the elegant streets. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew his face. They only knew him by his terrible actions. The press gave him a name that sent shivers down everyone's spine. They called him El Caníbal de San Isidro, the cannibal of San Isidro. This story is not for the faint of heart. It's a tale of unsolved crimes. It's, a deep dive into one of Argentina's greatest criminal mysteries. The cannibal was more than just a murderer. He was a phantom. He appeared, sowed terror, and then vanished as if he were never there. His crimes were brutal. They were savage. They defied all logic. The police were baffled. The community was paralyzed with fear. Who was this man? Why did he do these things? The questions piled up, but the answers never came. The case remains a cold, dark file, a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk just beneath the surface of a peaceful town. The legend of the cannibal grew with each passing day. It was fueled by whispers and newspaper headlines. People locked their doors earlier. They looked over their shoulders when walking at night. The beautiful tree-lined streets of San Isidro became a hunting ground. The killer's nickname was not just for shock value. It came from a horrific detail in his crimes, a detail that made him different from other killers. He didn't just take lives, he took something more. He violated the ultimate taboo. This made the fear personal. It made the threat feel ancient and monstrous. The story of the cannibal of San Isidro is the story of a community held hostage by an unknown monster. We are going to walk through the shadows of this case. We will explore the time, the place, and the fear. We will look at the victims, especially the one whose name became synonymous with this reign of terror. We will examine the police investigation, a desperate search for a man who left almost no clues. This is a journey into the heart of a true crime enigma. An enigma that, even today, on June 30th, 2025, has no solution. The cannibal of San Isidro remains a ghost, a question mark hanging over the history of Argentine crime. A story that begins and ends in pure, terrifying mystery. San Isidro in the 1970s was a picture of affluence. It was a place of large houses with beautiful gardens, a suburb north of the bustling capital, Buenos Aires. It was where the wealthy lived. It was supposed to be a safe haven, a bubble of tranquility far from the city's chaos and the country's political violence. Families chose San Isidro for its peace. They chose it for its prestigious schools, its exclusive social clubs, and its quiet, leafy avenues. It was the Argentine dream for many. A place where children could play on the streets and doors were often left unlocked. But this dream was about to become a nightmare. This idyllic image began to crack. A deep sense of unease started to creep in. The political situation in Argentina was tense, and no place was entirely immune. But the fear in San Isidro was different. It was more intimate. It wasn't about ideologies or armed groups. It was about a lone predator, a man who hunted in their perfect neighborhood. The feeling of safety evaporated. The trust between neighbors was replaced by suspicion. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The quiet nights were no longer peaceful. They were filled with a heavy silence, a silence that could be broken at any moment by a scream. The terror was democratic. It did not distinguish between the rich and the very rich. Everyone felt vulnerable. The killer chose his hunting grounds with precision. He favored the darkest corners of the most exclusive areas. He knew the layout of the suburb. He knew where the streetlights were broken. He knew the paths that ran alongside the train tracks. These were his domains. The residents started to change their routines. Evening strolls stopped. People rushed home from work. The vibrant social life of the suburb began to dim, overshadowed by a collective fear of the unknown monster in their midst. The police presence increased, but it did little to calm the public's nerves. Patrol cars driving by were a constant reminder of the danger, not a reassurance of safety. The media sensationalized the story. Every new detail, real or rumored, was printed in bold headlines. This fed the panic. The cannibal was on everyone's lips. He was the boogeyman made real. The bubble of San Isidro had burst. It was now a gilded cage where its inhabitants were trapped with a predator they could not see, could not understand, and could not escape. The golden suburb had lost its shine, tainted by the shadow of a brutal and mysterious killer. The killer's method was chillingly consistent. It was a macabre ritual performed under the cover of darkness. He was a creature of the night. His attacks always happened late, usually after midnight. He hunted in specific areas. He preferred quiet, poorly lit streets near the Mitre train line. These were places where a person could feel isolated, even in a populated suburb. He would wait patiently in the shadows. He was a predator stalking his prey. He watched. He waited for the perfect moment. His patience was one of his most terrifying weapons. He was in complete control of the situation before the attack even began. His victims were almost always young women. They were often walking home alone. They were students, workers, returning from a party or a late class. They were vulnerable targets. The killer would emerge from the darkness suddenly. There was no warning. The attack was swift and incredibly violent. He used a knife. His rage was evident in the brutality of the assaults. The victims had no chance to defend themselves. The attacks were a blitz of violence, designed to overwhelm and incapacitate immediately. He was not a thief. He never took valuables. His motive was something far darker than robbery. The detail that earned him his gruesome nickname was the most disturbing part of his ritual. After killing his victim, he would engage in acts of cannibalism. He would bite and tear flesh from specific parts of the body, often the neck and cheeks. This was his signature. It was an act that horrified investigators and the public alike. It suggested a deeply disturbed mind. This was not just murder, it was a desecration, a primitive, savage act that seemed to belong to another time, another world. It was this detail that elevated him from a simple murderer to a mythic monster in the public imagination. He left almost no evidence behind. He was a ghost. No fingerprints, no footprints, no murder weapon was ever recovered. He seemed to vanish back into the night from which he came. This lack of clues was maddening for the police. It was as if he knew exactly how to commit the perfect crime, time and time again. The consistency of his method, the specific locations, the choice of victims, and the horrific signature all pointed to a single, organized killer. A methodical hunter who took pleasure in the act of killing and what came after. A man who was both cunning and completely savage. Of all the victims attributed to the cannibal, one name stands out: Diana Goldstein. Her case became the symbol of the killer's reign of terror. She was a 20-year-old student. She was bright, full of life, and had a promising future ahead of her. She lived with her family in a beautiful house in San Isidro. She was the kind of person who represented everything the suburb was supposed to be: young, educated, and safe. Her brutal murder in November 1974 sent a shockwave through the community that is still felt today. Her story was not just a headline. It was a personal tragedy that every family in the area felt deeply. The night of her death was a typical one. Diana had been out. She was returning home late. She got off the train at the San Isidro station. From there, it was a short walk to her house, a walk she had made countless times before. But on this night, the killer was waiting. He was hiding in the shadows of the familiar streets. He ambushed her just a few blocks from the safety of her front door. The attack was sudden and ferocious. It followed his known pattern. The silence of the night was broken by a struggle, and then a final horrifying silence. Her family was waiting for her. She never arrived. Her body was discovered the next morning. The scene was gruesome. It confirmed the police's worst fears. The cannibal had struck again. Diana had been stabbed multiple times, and there, on her body, were the unmistakable signs of his horrific signature. The bite marks, the acts of cannibalism. The crime scene told a story of pure, unadulterated rage. For the community, this was the final straw. If it could happen to Diana Goldstein, so close to her home, it could happen to anyone. The illusion of safety was completely shattered. Her name became a rallying cry for justice and a somber reminder of the monster in their midst. The Goldstein case received immense media attention. Her photo was in every newspaper. Her story was told on every television channel. She was no longer an anonymous victim. She had a face, a name, and a family that was grieving in the public eye. This put enormous pressure on the police to find the killer. But despite the high profile of the case, the investigation hit the same dead ends. There were no witnesses. There was no useful forensic evidence. The killer had left behind only a brutalized victim, and a community drowning in fear and anger. Diana Goldstein became the most tragic chapter in the dark saga of the Cannibal of San Isidro. The police investigation was a masterclass in frustration. The detectives assigned to the case were some of the best in the Buenos Aires Provincial Police. They were experienced, they were dedicated, but they were chasing a ghost. The killer was meticulous. He was disciplined. He operated with an almost supernatural ability to avoid detection. Every crime scene was a frustrating puzzle with missing pieces. The lack of evidence was the biggest hurdle. In an era before DNA technology, investigators relied on fingerprints, witnesses, and physical clues. The cannibal provided none of these. He was a forensic phantom. Detectives worked around the clock. They profiled the killer. They believed he was a man who lived or worked in the area, someone who knew the streets of San Isidro intimately. He had to be familiar with the train schedules and the quietest routes. They theorized he was a psychopath, someone who appeared normal on the surface, but harbored a dark, violent secret. They interviewed hundreds of people. They checked hospital records for patients with strange injuries. They questioned known sex offenders. They set up traps, with undercover female officers acting as decoys. But the killer never took the bait. He was always one step ahead. The pressure from the public and the media was immense. The police were seen as incompetent. They couldn't protect the citizens of one of the country's wealthiest suburbs. This created tension. The investigation became a massive operation. They increased patrols. They put officers on the trains and in the stations. They urged the public to be vigilant and report anything suspicious. Tips poured in, but they all led to dead ends. Every lead went cold. The frustration grew within the police force. They knew they were hunting a serial killer, a rare phenomenon in Argentina at the time, and they were failing to stop him. The figure of the cannibal became larger than life. He was more than a man. He was a specter of terror. The police had no face to put on their wanted posters. They had no name. They only had a pattern of behavior and a gruesome signature. They were fighting an enemy they could not see. The case files grew thicker with reports, interviews, and theories, but they were no closer to an arrest. The killer's ability to commit such violent crimes and then melt back into society was his greatest strength and the investigation's greatest weakness. For the police, the Cannibal of San Isidro was the perfect unsolvable crime. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. After the murder of Diana Goldstein and a few subsequent attacks, the crimes just stopped. The year was 1975. The Cannibal of San Isidro vanished from the streets. The nights in the northern suburbs grew quiet again, but it was an uneasy quiet. Was he caught for another crime? Did he die? Or did he simply move away? The abrupt end to his reign of terror was just as mysterious as its beginning. The police were left with a cold case. The public was left with a lingering fear and a host of unanswered questions. The monster had simply disappeared into thin air. Several theories emerged to explain his sudden disappearance. One popular theory is that he was killed. Argentina was entering a very violent political period, the Dirty War. Thousands of people were disappeared by the military dictatorship that took power in 1976. It's possible the killer was a victim of this political violence, his death unrelated to his crimes. Another theory suggests he was arrested for a minor, unrelated offense and imprisoned. In jail, his violent urges would have been contained. This would explain why the attacks ceased so suddenly, without a public announcement of his capture for the murders. A third, more chilling theory is that he simply stopped. Some serial killers are known to have periods of inactivity. Perhaps he felt the police were getting too close. The massive manhunt and media attention after the Goldstein murder might have scared him into hiding. He might have moved to another city, or even another country, to continue his crimes where nobody knew his pattern. Or perhaps, and this is the most disturbing thought, he was able to control his urges and continued to live a normal life, a monster hiding in plain sight. His dark secret safe forever. We will never know for sure. The mystery of his disappearance is the final, haunting chapter of his story. There was no closure for the victims' families. There was no justice. The case of the Cannibal of San Isidro remains open, a permanent fixture in the annals of Argentine crime. His vanishing act cemented his legend. He wasn't caught and unmasked as a pathetic human being. He remained a terrifying supernatural figure, a ghost who haunted a community and then faded away, leaving behind only a legacy of fear and a series of brutal, unsolvable murders. The silence he left behind was almost as terrifying as the violence he had unleashed. The fear in San Isidro and the surrounding northern suburbs was not limited to just one phantom. During the same period, another predator was at work. His name was Francisco Laureana. He was known as El Sátiro de San Isidro, the satyr of San Isidro. Unlike the cannibal, Laureana was not a ghost. He was eventually identified. His story shows that the area was a hunting ground for more than one monster. This created an atmosphere of extreme paranoia. Any attack could be attributed to one of several dangerous individuals, making the police's job even more complex and the public's fear even more profound. Francisco Laureana was a rapist and murderer. He was responsible for a long series of brutal attacks on women between 1974 and 1975. His method was different from the cannibals. He was less of a phantom. He was more impulsive, more reckless. He left more clues. While the cannibal was a disciplined, ritualistic killer, Laureana was driven by a frantic, violent lust. He also operated in the same general area, the wealthy northern suburbs. This overlap in territory and timeline caused confusion. For a while, police wondered if they were hunting one killer with different methods or two separate monsters. The presence of two active serial killers in the same area at the same time is a rare and terrifying phenomenon. It amplified the sense of a world gone mad. The residents felt like they were under siege. The stories of the cannibal and the satyr blended together in the public's mind, creating a single, amplified narrative of terror. Laureana's crimes were horrific in their own right. He stalked his victims, attacked them, and showed no mercy. He was the embodiment of the violent threat that had invaded their peaceful lives, a more tangible figure than the elusive cannibal. Unlike the cannibal, Laureana's story has an ending. In February 1975, he was cornered by the police after a witness identified him. A dramatic shootout ensued. Laureana was killed. His death brought a sense of relief, but it did not solve the bigger mystery. The police had caught one predator, but the other, the cannibal, was still out there. In fact, some of the crimes originally attributed to Laureana were later reconsidered. Could some have been the work of the cannibal? The capture of Laureana closed one dark chapter, but it also highlighted the fact that the most mysterious and perhaps most terrifying killer of all remained at large. His identity and fate unknown.